that other people are afraid to talk about. My master's degree is in genocide, right? I'm not scared of the dark things like that. I'm not afraid of them, right? I'm not afraid to talk about them.
Hey you guys, what's up? It's Tuck Ross. You're listening to the Social Currency Marketing Podcast. This is the podcast that's covering the hottest digital and social media marketing topics that matter for your business now. This is all about strategy, whether you're a business leader or an entrepreneur, and we are here to help you get current quick. I'm your host, Tuck Ross. You can find me at Tuck Ross on all the social platforms. With me is Jessica Jensen. You can find her at Jessica K. Jensen on all the social platforms. And if you want to learn more about our show, check us out at socialcurrencyshow.com. All the episodes, all the show notes, and everything else is happening around the podcast. In today's episode, we are talking with Kristina Libby, PR and marketing veteran, NYU professor, and the host and producer of her new podcast, Threat Matrix. We're going to be covering a ton of deep topics today around cybersecurity, the responsibility of social platforms to combat fake news, and what is that line between PR and propaganda, where we start to ask ourselves, what is the truth? All right, here we go with Kristina.
Hey, Kristina. Thanks for joining us today. Tuck and I are really excited about this meaty topic of cyber warfare.
Thank you. I'm happy to be here.
All right. So, yeah, Kristina, we're so happy you're here. Before we jump in your current project, Threat Matrix, did I have that right?
Yes.
Yeah, love the name, by the way.
Thank you.
Let's rewind the clocks and really start from the beginning. You've worked for startups, Fortune 500s. You also teach. Tell us how you got your start in PR, social media, and how it led you to the place you're at today, including launching a podcast of your own.
Yeah, it's a long story. So my master's degree is in international security, and I focus pretty specifically on genocide. But being a young 20-year-old female with a high-pitched voice and a maybe a little overly peppy demeanor, I did not get a job right away when I finished my master's degree. So I ended up working at this nonprofit that they kind of were like, do some of this marketing stuff. There's this thing called Facebook. And I was like, sure, what's that? I can figure it out. And that's kind of where it started. And then the nonprofit was so awful that I went looking for a job. And in that process, there was a lot. It was like right as the economy was like 2008-ish, right? So we all know what happened in that time in our economy. And I ended up people being like, we'd want to give you a job, but would you try consulting? And so that's how I started in social media. And from there, I ended up having one of those days where I was like, I'm doing a lot more money with this consulting work than I am with my day job. Maybe I should just do that. And so I had started like a little social media company. And then someone was like, I want to be on the front page of the New York Times style section. And I was like, sure, I could do that. Like, we'll definitely be able to do that. And through kind of just like dumb luck that happens when you're 24, I was able to get this woman on the front page of the New York Times style section. And that's when I was like, oh, PR, I could do that too. And then it kind of spiraled from there. Yeah.
Very cool.
Well, I know you're leaving some stuff out there. I know because you and I met at Microsoft. So
right. Okay,
tell us about that.
Sorry. So, so I had this little social media agency. I did social media and PR for a kind of a smattering of really different clients. I worked for Philips. I worked for National Geographic. And while I was doing that, I moved from DC to New York City. And then a friend was like, hey, my friend at Microsoft is looking for someone who sits in this hybrid of PR and social media. And this was 2010 maybe. So it was still a time where like you were a social media person or you were a PR person, and there was not like an in-between zone. And so I just happened to have this weird set of skills because of that one woman asking me to get her in the New York Times, and was able to take that and go to Microsoft and then do this sort of interesting kind of hybrid role where I didn't do social media because Jess did, but I knew enough to be able to sort of be conversant across the topic and to know about influencers who were then called mommy bloggers because they were the only influencers around. And I had like a special love for mom bloggers. So did that, and then was at Microsoft for about 6 years, ended up leading consumer PR for Microsoft. So basically left a lot of the social stuff behind. And then left there to move for one horrible, awful year to Texas.
So don't be too harsh on Texas, because Tuck used to live there, just FYI.
Okay. Sorry. Okay, so I left Microsoft for 1 year and I lived in Dallas, Texas. And I moved to Dallas. We wanted to start an influencer marketing software company, really looking at the process for finding, hiring, and then tracking influencers. Did that for a couple of years and then realized I didn't want to make software for a living, that was not the thing that got me really excited. And so I've spent the last few years with a little agency and consulting, predominantly for startups that are in that $10 to $100 million range that are looking to scale to the next level, looking across their entire marketing funnel. Because what I've done since Microsoft is really, I have taught and worked on kind of any facet of marketing that you would need to be able to transition your company from that size range. I've also done some bigger work with other sort of much more established companies. I've continued to consult for Microsoft on a few things, but really in that startup space, I think is where I found my learnings in the past couple of years. So, and I teach also at NYU, I teach e-commerce and digital marketing and social media. Yeah.
Very cool. Hey, real quick, I actually have a follow-up question to this. So
Okay.
Jess and I have talked about this. It's a very interesting topic. PR, marketing. Who owns social media? Or is social media its own thing? Is it an ownership thing? Like, where does that fit in your mind?
I think it depends on your business objectives, right? So, and how you intend to use social media. So are you using it as a sales channel? In which case, I think it falls under marketing. If you're using it as a channel that's about community building and that's higher in the funnel, then I think it can often fall under PR, right? At the end of the day, what I think is the most important is just that it has alignment of messaging, right? So one of the things I see often is people who are like, oh, we'll have junior person XX run our social media. And it's someone who they don't really understand, right, what the overall core messaging of the company is. And so you end up with this like really strange messaging sort of error of messaging, right? Where social is kind of hip and cool over here, and then we're saying an entirely different thing over here. So at the end of the day, that's my point of view, is just that it's like, you have to make sure that there is strong alignment of messaging across channels, but I think they're all tactical, right? Like, I think PR should also sit under marketing. I don't actually think it should exist as its own channel. I mean, at the end of the day, we're only doing PR to market the company anyway.
Yeah, right. Well,
whose side did I follow?
I don't know if there's a good answer to it. It's a curiosity, right? Because these things always sit in different places. And is social media its own function because it has customer care and marketing and PR aspects to it? Or are these, different parts of these silos? That's it? Or does PR sit under marketing, like you said? So I think it is dependent on each business. I think you brought out a really good point, though, and this is something we've hit on, is that as long as the narrative of the organization is very clear, and the purpose of what these things are doing as a tactic, as a delivery channel, sometimes syndication channel, is aligned, then I think you have the right perspective for sure. So
yeah, I teach this book called Traction. I don't know if you've all ever read it, but I think it's probably like the best marketing startup book out there. And it's essentially this book that talks about your traction channels, right? Because in the fact that there are these 23 traction channels, social media is one of them. PR actually gets put in there twice, once for traditional PR and then once for non-traditional PR. But ultimately, right, what it's all in service of is traction for your business. And that's actually this way that I kind of like to think about it, right? It's like the only reason we're marketing things is because we want to grow our company. So does it even matter where it sits? Does it even matter how we talk about them? Probably not, as long as we're just figuring out which channels are actually moving the business forward, right? Like I often still think there's a lot of people who do social media who like shouldn't be on there. Like the amount of time it costs them to grow and think about those channels could be so much better spent on a different channel that would help evolve the company faster. But I also think that way about PR, right? Like if you're an e-com startup, PR is a nice to have. It is not a need to have after a certain threshold point because it doesn't actually drive direct sales, right? So I like that idea of thinking about them in the perspective of what's driving traction more than anything.
Yeah, well, so many things that you brought up there that first of all, I want to give you huge kudos because I totally remember when you launched the kind of mommy blogger and was it Blog Her, the conference, I believe that you would attend, right?
I went to every mom conference there for a couple of years.
I totally remember that. And that was like the first time I'd ever even heard of the idea of a mommy blogger. You kind of introduced me to that idea, which obviously blew up and is, a huge, huge audience in terms of consumption and buying power. So kudos to you for that. But later on, you and I reconnected and again, want to give a shout out to you because you really became kind of a mentor to me when I was building the social influencer program at Qualcomm. So thank you.
Pleasure. Always happy to help.
Yeah, it was so great to have someone else who is sort of in the same circles and doing some of the same things, but maybe for different kinds of companies and, on a different coast, just to bounce ideas off of. And I feel like to the conversation that you and Tuck were having around where should social media sit, is it a PR function? Is it a marketing function? I feel like influencer marketing is kind of having that same sort of sense of self-discovery and trying to figure out where does this go and is it a brand awareness play, again, top of the funnel kind of thing, brand love, or is it more transactional? Are they, is there a commerce link they're driving to? Kind of all the different things that we used to talk about regarding social years back, I feel like now is hitting influencer marketing.
Yeah, I think you're right. And I think that question kind of goes back to the traction response as well, right? So it's like, what kind of traction are you hoping to get with influencer marketing? Right? Is it just a brand play? In which case, great, like pay them what they want to be paid and believe that a rising tide lifts all boats and that there will be a benefit for it down the road. I have become disillusioned, might not be entirely the right word, but a little bit about the space where you were building this influencer marketing software and you look at actual conversion rates, like e-commerce conversion rates against cost to hire an influencer and start to raise a lot of questions about like, is this viable for a business that is careful about and considering their marketing dollars, right? And does this play out? And then, we see these industry trends towards the micro influencer and is like, okay, sometimes that works. Sometimes a giant influencer works and sometimes none of it works at all, period. Right. And so the thing about social to me is that social works. Like it actually does work, right? Like it works as a way to gain exposure. It works as a way to create a community. Like it does a bunch of things that you can sort of track and measure. And influencer marketing, I think, really is at this place where it's so expensive for so many people to do it in a paid capacity that it's like, I have these questions, is it even worth it? And then from an unpaid capacity, I also have a bunch of questions of like, is it worth it for them? It's their business. Should it be a business? Like when you think about it from this sort of sociological perspective of like, we have now changed ourselves into billboards and we're using social media as a way to sort of sell our lives. And like, what does that mean for humanity? And like, do we all want to be part of that? And is that a good thing or a bad thing? Or like, were we always walking billboards and now we're just being really clear and explicit about it? And like, it kind of comes to a point of if you kind of have the question of like, is this good for us? That was actually one of the reasons. There was a few different reasons that we didn't continue to make the software. But as we looked at things like how you apply AI to influencer marketing, how you look at these sort of big data sets, and then you want to start to make predictive recommendations about what kind of influencer works for which company. And you start to realize you are doing this thing of like trafficking in humans and selling them. And I don't know, I think I just got to a point where I was just like, is this right? And from that perspective, that's sort of where I feel like I've fallen down on the entire space now.
Yeah, I obviously you're opening up a huge topic that we've touched on a little bit here and there on the podcast. And I know Tuck and I both have some similar feelings when you've been in the digital and in the social media and then the influencer spaces for, quite a while, and you've seen it evolve. And then I want to get into the topic really that you're focused on with your new podcast. We're seeing some of the dark sides. And I think those of us that spend so much time in the spaces and have, thought about it, we all kind of are questioning what is going on, and how much of this do I want to be a part of?
Yeah, this whole concept of commercializing attention, right? And always there'll always be influence, and there'll always be word of mouth. To your point, but the fact that we're actually monetizing it is a completely different story, especially on the personalized view. And what does that do for people, in terms of who they are, and what their self-worth is. And, the trendy thing is wellness now, right? Digital wellness, and how you're actually taking care of yourself in these spaces, setting time limits and all the rest of that, because we just can't control it. So it's a big topic for sure.
There's something really interesting on that point that, I don't know how old the two of you are, but there is a bit of a generational conversation happening about Gen X versus millennials, right? And
I'm 21, by the way.
That was my guess. I thought maybe you were part of Gen Z, so I didn't have a role.
Sorry, I shouldn't have laughed so loud at that.
But and sort of the wellness industry, right? And I think there's this interesting thing happening where people are like trying to find themselves in wellness. There's this whole talk of digital wellness. And part of that arose, right, because we do have this really distorted sort of, we have this really distorted sort of like, like oxytocin, but no, that's what it's called. With the dopamine hits that you're getting from social media, right? So like we created this culture where social media became this thing that was so addictive for us to do, right? Then now we're seeing this swing back to like the digital detox, where we're focusing like health and wellness as a way of finding meaning in our lives, right? And there was this interesting series of articles in the New York Times recently talking about how like Gen X is not interested in finding meaning in their lives. Like that wasn't a Gen X thing, right? Like because of where they fell in the curve of generations, meaning is like not that important. But for millennials, this quest to find meaning, I don't know if you remember there was this Washington Post survey that came out in like 2012, and it like 70% of people said they wanted to grow up to be an influencer. Like it wasn't like they wanted to be an actor, or they just wanted to grow up to be famous, right? Famous, which has sort of become to mean for most millennials being Instagram famous. And so as we look to this idea of digital wellness or digital detox, we're seeing a bunch of these influencers shift into the space of like wellness influencers. And that's this burgeoning space, but ultimately it's just the same thing, right? Like how do you actually detox from something that has just become like a core part of cultural consumption, and how does that change? And I honestly think that the only solution is actually sort of whatever comes next in technology. So as we change as the internet shifts and no longer becomes the internet and isn't this thing that we consume sort of passively on our screens, is a moment where Instagram and Facebook will no longer become relevant in the way that they are right now. So as we look to sort of that fundamental like consumption shift, that's actually we'll enter this moment of sort of digital wellness or digital well-being. But I think it's actually going to be driven by Gen Z, right? Who sees the way that millennials have sort of gotten this real distorted self-image and this understanding of what it means to sort of be an authentic, well human being, but that we're still probably like a decade from that.
Yeah.
Next up.
Yeah. That's very heady.
Sorry.
We're going to wrap with predictions. So we're going to come back to that. I love that line of thinking. So this is actually a good segue because we've gone from, kind of your background and again, a bit more of the like table stakes with digital and social influencer to these sort of more socio-political, larger topics, the ramifications, if you will, of digital media, digital marketing. So I want to bring in the fact that you've got a new podcast launching this summer about cyber warfare. And I want to start with a quick definition of cyber warfare, just in case some folks listening aren't as familiar. So cyber warfare, according to dictionary.com, is the use of computer technology to disrupt the activities of a state or organization, especially the deliberate attacking of information systems for strategic or military purposes. So I'm curious, with the background that you have, both Fortune 500, entrepreneurial, lots of different areas of digital, PR, what led you to focus on this particular topic of cyber warfare?
I like to talk about the things that other people are afraid to talk about. My master's degree is in genocide, right? I'm not scared of the dark things like that. I'm not afraid of them, right? I'm not afraid to talk about them. And I have this real belief that it's the things we keep in the dark that are the most dangerous to us. And so I think when I sort of look back at the things I've done, I could have never gotten to this place, this topic, without the time I spent in Microsoft, without learning sort of what it means to talk about cutting edge technology, to live on the cutting edge of it, right? When we were, the things that Microsoft Research was talking about 5 years ago are things that we're starting to see at play now. This at Qualcomm, y'all are always like 7 or 10 years ahead of whatever's in the market. And so it was sort of this weird path from being someone who academically focused on trauma and mass casualty incidents into someone who became a technologist, into the space in the last couple of years where I've worked. I worked for a cybersecurity company that was really very, 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 very deep in this space on the marketing front, and was kind of like, wait, what are we marketing? What are we talking about? And I realized I didn't, as someone who was relatively highly educated, relatively, paying attention to what's happening on the news, I didn't know that we are actively engaged in multiple cyber wars with multiple nations happening right now. So there are at least 30 nations who are engaged in cyber war every single day. And the more I dug into that topic, the more confused I became of just like, why aren't people talking about this? Why isn't this something that's in the public discourse? And then a friend at Popular Mechanics from my PR days was like, hey, maybe this is a podcast. And so now I've been able to sort of use all that academic and then that workplace knowledge overlaid with my marketing knowledge to try and create something that makes a really difficult topic consumable, so that my mom is just as likely to listen as someone who's a cybersecurity expert. Did that answer your question? I feel like I'm a little bit off the rails.
Yeah, that was great. I think this obviously is a huge topic, and I'm curious, why now? Sort of what in 2019 makes this topic feel extra relevant, where there would be an audience, which I'm sure there will be, around cyber warfare and, some of the insidious side of digital. Why now?
Well, as we all know, Russia hacked America's elections. That's sort of unquestioned. North Korea has hacked a number of different American companies, as well as is actively engaged in cyber criminal activities. And China is basically stealing everyone's IP. So that's been going on for the past few years, and cyber criminals are now on the rise. It's actually a $6 billion industry, the dark part of cyber war. So like the criminal dark market is $6 billion and growing.
Wow.
Last year, 24 states had their electrical grids attacked. Not everyone's electrical grid went down, but that's alarming. In over 19 states, the 311, 911 systems have been taken out. And this is just growing, right? I was recently part of a NATO working group on the topic of critical infrastructure. And if we think about someone attacking our critical infrastructure, which means like our electrical grid, our water systems, the internet, you start to realize it's not that hard. And what we're doing is playing a game of saying, well, they probably wouldn't take down our electricity. That seems crazy, right? And so we're living in this world right now where we're just assuming that violence isn't going to happen because we don't think the other person is going to do it. And that always makes me really concerned, right? Like, that's actually not how the world functions. And so because so many of those things are happening right now, it just felt like we have to talk about this. We have another election that's coming up that we need to be prepared for. But election security to me is tantamount, is actually incredibly important. But it's equally important that we think about our electricity or our cashless payment systems or just the safety of our data in general before it's too late.
Yeah, I think it's super interesting that you say that, right? Because everything is becoming ones and zeros, and as connected devices and, everything is moving into that state where you have to be connected, and we're increasingly reliant on things that are connected, right? Like if everybody goes to electric cars, what happens with that, right? And all these, to your point, the systems that are put together, if they're disrupted, in a lot of cases, people wouldn't know what to do because almost a lot of the old systems are going away in favor of the connected systems because of efficiency and cost, and yet exposing us to potentially new threats that we're not fully capable of, right? And like, I feel like I've seen this movie, right? Like China has a program literally called Skynet, where they're actually putting this together so that they can monitor everything, and then how that works in terms of privacy and security as well. Just to get a little more specific, we saw this video of Nancy Pelosi slurring her speech, fake news coming out. And just to bring it back to social media, YouTube removed it right away. Facebook says it doesn't violate their policy. Twitter had no comment. It's actually still out there. It's up. It's still relevant. It's really interesting to kind of see how each of these different spheres are reacting in terms of this, depending on how they're positioning their platform, whether it's free speech or enablement, or that it is actually violating policy. So what is your perspective on the social media space? I guess I could say digital media marketing in general of these platforms and the content that they either leave up or take down as part of these efforts.
You said so many things, but okay, let's.
Yeah, can you put that in the box?
Let's talk about them. Okay, so first of all, I just want to say you mentioned the thing about electric cars, right? So more and more people getting electric cars. What that means is each one of those ports where you plug in that car into the electrical grid opens up a new vulnerability to the electrical grid. And yet our electrical grid was built over 100 years ago and is not made to sustain that sort of level of growth, right? So it is built, and I'm taking this back to social media. So our electrical grid was built not for these kinds of challenges, right? Our internet was built as this means of sharing information, right? It was actually not built with, no one when we built the internet assumed people would attack the internet, right? Like it wasn't built like that. We didn't think that was a thing. And yet here we are now. Well, it's almost 40 years later. It's something that's constantly under attack. And if you're someone who's smart enough to know how to do it, it would actually be very easy to take down the internet in small parts in targeted areas or across the board if you want to. I go back to our social media platforms, and it is basically the same example, right? They weren't built with malintent. Like Mark Zuckerberg didn't build Facebook with the idea that people would use it as an insidious place to spread disinformation. Instagram.
I think he just wanted to find hot girls.
Which maybe is its own sort of insidious center of disinformation. But,
it's a little insidious.
It is what it is. Yeah. And so we have these three platforms and more. We'll talk about the Chinese social scoring system in a second. But we have these three platforms that were built with the intention that they would be used for goodness, right? And part of what happens in that model is that we're not thinking about building for security. And so there is sort of this ongoing belief at the moment around this idea of secure by design, right? And we didn't do that from the beginning because I think we were just innocent in our approach to what these platforms are. It's the big concern happening with AI. It's the big concern with 5G right now, right? Is we're not building things that are secure by design. And so I look at the problem of the Nancy Pelosi video or any kind of propaganda in general, and you just start to realize they're not made to combat those issues, but there's sort of a few bigger points than one of these one-off videos, which is also the fact of, should these companies be able to monitor and decide what it is that should be out there, right? Like, do I trust Mark Zuckerberg to be safeguarding our nation? I don't know Mark Zuckerberg personally. I have probably a lot of private thoughts about it, but it is that idea of like, should a company do it, right? And there was the New York Times article by his co-founder recently saying it's a monopoly, that we should disband it, that we shouldn't let any of these systems have such control over how it is that we're sharing and spreading our news. The best book on this topic is this book called Like War by Peter Singer, who's a strategist out of New America. And Like War is a book about the information war that's currently happening globally. When you talk about information war and cybersecurity at the same time, we often talk about them as a phenomenon called hybrid war. And that's because propaganda warfare is a common military tactic used to soften the ecosystem before you go in with a broader response. And the idea of doing that, right, is that you want to make it so no one thinks that they can trust anything. And the moment we take away trust in the system, well, okay, all of a sudden, who do you trust? Why do you trust? Where do you trust? I would argue that there are definitely large pockets of America where trust is already eroded across these systems. And I don't think we can get it back. Right? There are people who believe that everything Fox News says is right without looking at it in any other context. And the same of the New York Times or CNN or it was sort of wherever your political biases are. So when you think about it that way, is trust already eroded? Has it already eroded on these platforms? And then the question comes, so what can the platforms do at this point? And I think we're too far gone. Like, yes, probably we should take down a fake video. Yes, but we've already missed it, right? Like, there are too many fake videos. Is that the right thing to do? Do we blame the platforms, or do we actually look at something like the government and say it's a social health issue to educate our population about what a fake video is, or how to look for it, or how to check information? I don't know. Like, I'm not sure that's the right response either. But I think we're sort of in this really fraught time where, like, maybe we've already missed this and we are already engaged in these propaganda wars. And the question is sort of like, well, what do we do now? Like, how do we make there be some sort of like technology that has to be put on video? Like, I have no idea what the answer is, but that's my thinking, very rambly thinking.
No, it's almost like this point of like, where's the line, right? Like, where's the line between PR to propaganda? Where's the line of someone who's genuinely themselves versus an influencer, and what they're delivering in terms of a message? And when does it become fake news versus what is an advertising message or someone's personal agenda, or a biased, news perspective, like, right? So, and who's making that decision, to your point?
Yeah, is an influencer fake news, right? Did we already lose it then, where we're like, yes, I'm going to trust that, like, Kim Kardashian really does like detox tea, right? Like did we already let it go, and now we're just seeing the fruits of the labor now? I mean, the same is true about AI. So the big argument in AI right now is that we're not building secure by design AI. We're sort of falling into this Silicon Valley model of build fast and break things, instead of thinking about, like, okay, the algorithms that we base AI on now, whoever wins this AI game is going to have a massive impact on our entire society, both from a cybersecurity perspective, from an anything perspective. And yet we're not challenging those people at a really fundamental level to make sure that they're building fair and honest algorithms to make these machine learning models that will lead to AI, right? There's a great book called Weapons of Math Destruction by Kathy O'Neill. And it talks about this, right? Of almost like the health of our AI systems now, which is something that we forgot about with social media. There's an even more, not more interesting, there's a continued version of this topic in this book called The Big Nine. And The Big Nine looks at American and Chinese models of AI development. It looks at the Chinese model against this sort of social scoring system. and asks the question of who do we want to win the AI war, right? So there is China building this AI model, and then in North America, we're building an AI model. The Chinese model, with sort of the big three tech giants in China, is being government-driven and government-directed, so it's building in a really clear agenda. Whereas the North American model is being given over to these tech companies in the same way that we do with these social media platforms, with the belief that technologists have a better agenda setting, sort of better vision, better direction for building an AI for our future than a connected government initiative would. And I don't know that we have seen that play out in social media enough that I trust that the future of Facebook versus Google AI is going to be better than what China built.
Yeah, both sound really scary.
The book at the Big Nine is actually fascinating because it really paints a picture of what both of these kinds of AI will develop into in the next 50 years.
Interesting.
And it is really scary. And it's really scary if you think China, sort of as we look at the next tech revolution and AI, China wins it with AI, what kind of society that looks like in the world as China then emerges as the dominant power. Yeah.
Wow. Awesome. Heavy stuff.
I know. I just wanted to actually.
I want to get like an ice cream cone and go sit in like a park somewhere and play my phone at home.
Right. I know. I just want to jump into that big, the what's the museum of ice cream with the entire room's full of sprinkles. I need to like shake it off.
Just don't take a picture.
Just don't take a picture because then I'm officially an Instagram influencer.
Yes,
but bringing it back to Threat Matrix, because I feel like we talked about really broad topics, and I'm sure all of that feeds into your editorial approach and so forth. But I wanted just to give the audience a quick glimpse. So what are maybe 2 or 3 of the key topics or themes that you're going to cover on Threat Matrix as you guys launch this summer?
Yeah, so Threat Matrix is a hypothetical fiction podcast. So essentially what we've done is try and take the topic of cyber warfare and make it something that almost feels like a true crime narrative. So we've interviewed 30 or 40 experts across the field of cybersecurity, cyber war, whatever, and woven their stories into a fictionalized narrative. So what you actually see or what you listen to as you listen to the podcast is the months leading up to a massive cyber attack against Manhattan, what that cyber attack looks like. We take you through the experience, and then what it looks like as we continue for a few months after. Of course, it's a big attack, and it's sort of, it has to be a little bit kind of Hollywood for it to be worth listening to. But what's interesting is that everything we've built the attack off of has already happened somewhere in the world. And so the question we're asking fundamentally is, what would transition a cyber war into a kinetic war? So a war where there's actually bombs and bullets. And what does that escalation point look like? How far do we go until it breaks, until the government decides that what we have to do is bomb or attack or kill someone based on what they've done in the digital domain?
Wow.
More music with ice cream.
I'm excited. No, I'll listen to that. It's a little bit out of my normal realm of podcast topics, but I feel like I would learn a ton. And it would also open my mind to things that I probably don't spend enough time thinking / worrying about.
The good thing is there are lots of other people worrying about it. I think the thing maybe we forget is that in a cyber attack is based on there being a number of weak points, right? And a bad actor exploits that number of weak points. So actually the way to stop a cyber war in America is to have better personal protection of your own security, which is relatively easy, right? If you think about it, it's exactly the same metaphor as why we get vaccines, right? So the more people who are vaccinated against something, smallpox, say, the less likely there is a smallpox outbreak. In this case, the more we take our personal digital security seriously, the less opportunities there are for people to take advantage of it and actually commit massive attacks. And that's both true of like our home security system, like making sure the password on your router is hard and maybe changing it occasionally, or in a corporate environment, right? Which is just like understanding not to click the link of the thing you don't know what it is from someone you don't know who sent it to you, even if it's a really cute, like, cats at the Museum of Ice Cream, right? Like, and then it's sort of on you just that base level. Like, the thing I often talk about to people is, so I was attacked when I was 25 by a homeless person on the street. It was really scary, and I was able to fight my way out of the attack, but it was like a long fight, and they had a knife, and I was on the ground, and it was scary, right? And so I spent almost a decade being afraid on some level, even though I got further and further away from the incident, at night in different strange cities or around homeless people. And then in the past year, I learned Krav Maga, and I took kickboxing, and I now know how to fight, right? So like in the instance that situation happens again, I will be a lot more prepared. And that's all I need to feel comfortable, right? It's sort of the same thing with this of like, if you know that attack is going to happen and you learn the thing you need to learn in order to protect yourself, then even if it does happen, you're prepared. And so that's the whole point of the podcast is like, if I can make you understand what a potentially horrible cyber incident could look like, you can protect yourself just enough that either you stop it from happening or that if it does happen, you're at least prepared to deal with the situation.
Yeah, it's almost like there's two steps, right? The first is just awareness and some of the things that people just don't even know, right? Like I save all my browser passwords inside Chrome, and you realize that is an unprotected browser, and someone's just going to break that and go after it. So, but I think it's awareness, and then to your point, being able to have.
Now you've just told everyone on this podcast.
No, I said that was a fictionalized case, right? That was my Threat Matrix podcast. I actually use nothing like that. But I think it's awareness for one, and for two, it's the giving them the tool set, right? Like your Krav Maga, like give them the tool set to be able to react and defend themselves against these.
Because the thing is, it's like if we don't know about it, if we don't think of it as possible, then when it does happen, like how much scarier is that? Like if you don't know cyber war is a thing, and then you wake up one day and the power is out in LA or San Francisco or Manhattan, wherever you live. And the government's like, yeah, it's a computer glitch. We'll get it back on. We'll get it back on. And then 5 days later, it's still out because a foreign actor is playing with that system and playing with the government. And then all of a sudden, the government's like, hey, guys, we're going to bomb Russia because it turns out they're the reason the power is out. Right. And then everyone's just going to be like, what? Russia? Like it's just going to be so crazy that you can't respond to it because it just seems outlandish to the point you almost can't even believe it. So if we talk about it, at least then if it happens, then we'll be like, oh yeah, we knew that was a possibility. Now we at least are less scared. Maybe.
So you're listening to Social Currency. We are talking with Kristina Libby, host and producer of the new podcast called Threat Matrix about cyber warfare, which we just talked about. Kristina, you've shared that search, social, and now probably podcasting, since that's what's up next, you think are digital and digital channels that are really important to, especially communicating and making awareness available for anyone. Why do you think these are the most critical channels right now?
Yeah, so I work with a lot of e-com companies. I feel like search is the thing that everyone does wrong. I feel like people forget the power of SEO in driving people to their website, which is literally just like the difference between having a store on like all the way over on the West Side Highway in New York or like having a store in Soho, right? I think that's, I think search is incredibly important particularly because the cost of social media ads has become so expensive that it feels like you just have to be thinking about it as a channel and you have to be creating content that's optimized. And I do think that maybe we're reaching this kind of weird saturation point where the most effective way of marketing your business will not be online for a little while, right? Just because everything online is so expensive. I think we'll see like a flip point. I just talked about that with my students yesterday. But right now I think search is important. I still think not enough people are thinking about their SEO strategy. I think social is important because I think community is really important for brand growth and success. And I think, especially in this era where we still feel so disconnected, where everything we do is through a phone, where like, I was just reading, I don't know if I can talk about this on your podcast, but I was just reading this New York Times article, and they were talking about Slutbot. So Slutbot is like a chatbot to teach you how to have like slutty, sexy text conversations, but you have them with your bot instead of a person. And I think it's the same company, or this other company created this ghosting app. So like, rather than just ghost someone, the app will ghost them on your behalf. Like that's where we are right now culturally, right? Like, we're seeing a rise in like sex bots. We're so, like, we are choosing to have sex with a robot because, like, having sex, I actually went to this lecture on robots, and as I got into this, an AI and robots, I got into this elevator with this man. He was like, yeah, sex bots seem weird, but like, women are so much drama. And I was just like, okay, so socially what we're deciding to do is like, we would rather have sex with a robot than like interact with someone who has human emotions. Oh, like, that's weird, right? And we're like, so sorry.
No, it's like looking for the easy path, right? And that's
right.
The premise is that everything is all about ease and convenience. And what is the easy consumer experience? I mean, literally that is that, right?
Right. It's a sex robot. And so like, that's why social is important, because it's giving us a space to be communal. I think what's really interesting is like the rise of Facebook groups, like Facebook groups, like sort of things that are off page happening in social, like the rise of messaging bots in Facebook Messenger, both on behalf of brands or on behalf of other organizations. And I think it's a direct response to this fact of just being like, but I have no one to touch and talk to. I still think it's kind of a false proxy, but I think it's like the best we can do. And the podcasts, I think, are interesting because it's super intimate. Right? Like, a podcast is my voice in your ears. And that's a thing that feels really deeply human. I think there is still kind of an elite podcast audience, right? Like, consumption of podcasts is on the rise, but it's still a relatively small percentage of podcasts, of people who are consuming podcasts. But I think it works because I think, like, it's not a group activity. Right. And it feels like you're doing it for me. And there's something, it's like being on the phone with you. But I think because it just feels more human. I don't know if that's true, but that's kind of how
I think we've used the word intimate about podcasts because it's in your ear and it feels very personal. I do think, I think intimate is the right word. Right. And I think I also think as we look at geographically what people are doing, like, people are having to drive further and further into work or commute further because the cost of living is so expensive, that a podcast is sort of the perfect accompaniment when like pop radio feels like candy. At least a podcast feels like, even if it's a true crime podcast, it still sort of feels like a salad, right? And so I think we're like, oh, maybe there's a moment where detoxing with some podcasts.
That's going to be your quote. Right. Where radio is candy, to podcasting is a green salad. I love it. So I know this is such a great conversation, and I know we've covered so many topics. I want to wrap us with a few kind of quick fire questions. I'm going to do one, and then I'll hand it to Tuck to ask you the things that we always like to ask our guests at the end. So my question for you is just quickly, if you had 2 or 3 predictions 10 years from now, when you think about these discussions around social media, fake news, cyber attacks, 10 years from now, what do you predict?
The way we consume everything is going to change. I don't know what that means, right? But I do believe that we'll be in a more like VR, AR forward world, which I think means the way that we actually consume everything on the internet will be different. I don't think we have the ability to understand yet where we're going, unless maybe just you do. Like, maybe the Qualcomm people are already there, but I don't know yet. But I do think that our entire consumption pattern will change. That being said, I think our time online and our consumption online, for most groups of people, will increase. I think people will be spending 10 plus hours a day doing whatever it is they're doing against a digital.
So more consumption, but perhaps
in a different way.
Consuming in a different way.
Yeah. And then, I think AI is the future, right? Like we have to understand the role that AI is going to play, and it's going to make us a lot more vulnerable and increase the number of security challenges that we have across like a whole bunch of worlds. 10 years from now, we won't have artificial like super intelligence. It will still be something that is an interaction between humans and the algorithms we create. But I think we need to start to really be thinking about the ethical lines that we want to let AI play in.
Yeah, for sure.
So, Kristina, one of the things we like to chat about is kind of like how do you like to stay up to date on digital trends? But I think more specifically for you, I'm super interested in, we talked about being aware and being able to defend yourself. What are your sources for people if they just, want to take 10 minutes out and get more educated, help understand what's going on in the space so that they can understand, react, maybe protect themselves a little bit more so now with things they can do? What are your good sources for that?
There's this website called don'tclickonthat.com, which is a good primer if you just like, how should I protect myself personally? So that's good. The problem with this space is that there aren't that many places that a more general consumer can learn about sort of cyber warfare or cybersecurity. It's mostly focused on the industry itself. But there are some good books. So I would say if you want to understand the space, there's this book called Zero Day. And Zero Day, I think that's what this one called. I'm pretty sure it's called Zero Day.
We'll get it from you in the show notes.
Yeah. I'm pretty sure it's called Zero Day. And it's the book that talks about the first U.S. There was a U.S.-Israeli coordinated attack. And that's kind of where this whole cyber war conversation came from. So that's a good place to just say read that book, and it helps you understand the geopolitical landscape of what we're talking about and why it matters.
All right, Kristina, one piece of advice you'd give to leaders trying to figure out digital and social marketing.
Listen to this podcast.
We didn't even ask her to say that. Oh, what a good friend.
I believe it though.
Thank you for that.
Awesome.
It's and that's always been our goal, right? Is to try to kind of deconstruct digital media and social marketing to make it a little more approachable for folks that didn't grow up with it, which, many of us came into it and somewhere in our early careers, but it's a different world. I think if you're being expected to speak about these things and understand and make decisions and allocate budget, but you haven't actually spent a lot of time. So that's always our goal.
It's complicated and it changes every day. Yeah.
That's the thing. Yeah. Staying on top of it is almost impossible. I guess that's also the other edge of that sword is that's also what makes it really interesting, the dynamic nature of it. Well, hey, Kristina, thank you so much. This was so informative and interesting. And again, kind of like blew my mind. No, you're totally right. My biggest takeaway from this was that if you don't understand or you aren't interested or curious about the possibilities, you're never going to prepare yourself. You're never going to have that backup plan or change those passwords on a regular cadence, And so if nothing else, it makes me just pause and go, okay, where potentially are the vulnerabilities? Where are the gaps that, that myself at work or myself and my family and anyone listening, just try to button it up and protect yourself in advance until, like you said, some of these technologies really are built with security baked in from the beginning, which is, I think, where we all want it to eventually evolve to.
Just my last point on that, this idea of this is true of every field, right? Like we're talking about cybersecurity right now, but the same thing it's true of digital marketing of just be curious, look at what's happening in the future and find the vulnerabilities in whatever you're doing, right? So where is the weakness in your digital marketing plan? It's kind of all of this is the exact same thing. And the fact that it's I studied the war novel as an undergrad major, but it's like everything is a war novel, right? Like there is a bunch of different options on the table. We are figuring out what those options are. And we have to always be really curious about like, what's the black swan incident? What's the thing that's going to come out of left field? Is it, the rise of WeChat? Is it, the next Snapchat? Like what are these things, right? And where are the vulnerabilities in your plan and how do you protect yourself against them? And ultimately, it's just a question of saying, I want to take care of me, whether me as my company or me as me individually. And the best way to do that is to just understand where you're weak and then get stronger there.
Totally. All right. So Kristina, where can people find you or learn more about Threat Matrix?
Can I tell you in a couple weeks?
Okay, well, where can they at least follow you for now?
Look up Threat Matrix. We have an Instagram channel. That's actually probably the best destination for people. And we have a Twitter channel. It's like not the way you say it. I did that Twitter channel.
Are you new to this?
I've never even heard of it.
I followed your Twitter channel last night.
On the Twitter.
And they can find you, I know, at Kristina Libby on Twitter. We should. Yes, let's let them know how to find you for all the goodness.
Perfect.
All right,
guys, we're going to wrap up. But Kristina, thank you so much again for joining us. All the pieces that you talked about we'll have in the show notes, and really appreciate your time. Although we may not put Slutbot in that list, but everything else I think is cool to throw in there. But again, thank you so much for your time. We're looking forward to Threat Matrix and really appreciate you spending time with us today.
Thank you. I'll talk to you all soon. Bye.
Bye.
Bye, Kristina.